Lee, in your new book, The Case for the Real Jesus, you discuss some of these so-called gospels that liberal scholars love to talk about and people have so much interest in these days.
Right.
But you tell a fascinating story about something called the secret gospel of Mark. Give us the scoop on that.
You're right. It is a fascinating story. It is one of the most bizarre mystery stories I've ever encountered in my life. Here's the basic gist of it. I'm not going to give it all away to you because in the book I really spell it out and talk about all the clues and so forth. But this, Mark, is so bizarre. There was a pretty well-respected scholar from Columbia University named Morton Smith. And several years ago, Morton Smith said he made a huge discovery. He was in a monastery in the Middle East, and he found in the back of a book where somebody, in a book dated 1646, somebody had copied a bit of a letter, an ancient letter, from Clement of Alexandria, who lived in the 2nd century. And in this letter, Clement quotes the secret gospel of Mark. And the theory was that there was a papyrus that was crumbling, and so some monk in the 1600s said, I better copy this into the blank pages in the back of a book to preserve it. So here we have, supposedly, this huge discovery. Clement of Alexandria, right back in the 2nd century, quoting the secret Gospel of Mark, which Morton Smith said was written by Mark, who wrote the Gospel we find in the New Testament. But this was the secret Gospel. This was only for the sophisticated initiates. This was only for those who have superior knowledge. This was only for those who were ready to get the secret teachings of Jesus. Now, we don't have it all in there because it only has 2.5 pages and it's only quoted. But what do we find? Well, we find something very, very bizarre and controversial.
I can't wait. Tell me, Lee.
What we find is the story of Jesus raising a young man from the dead, and then this young man coming to Jesus and spending the night with him. And frankly, Mark, the homoerotic undercurrents to this cannot be missed. The implicit implication of this gospel is that Jesus was gay.
And this is claiming to be back from the original...
Claiming to be the secret teachings of the very person who wrote the Gospel of Mark that we find in the New Testament. But this is only for people ready to hear it. Well, as you can imagine, this is very controversial. And
No kidding.
yeah, and so this had some fanfare when it came out. What have we found, though, in recent years as we've investigated this? And in
I
my
have a
book,
feeling there's more to the story.
there is more to the story, as Paul Harvey likes to say. I investigated this particular case, and I don't want to spoil it for the readers of my book, but what I will tell you, Mark, is that as investigators examined the handwriting, as they studied the forensic evidence of this alleged finding, which, by the way, has disappeared now. Nobody can find it. Yeah, it's gone.
Yeah.
It's gone. What we find is conclusive, in my view, conclusive evidence that Morton Smith, who is now deceased, that Morton Smith made this up. He forged it. He created this as a hoax. And not only did he create it as a hoax, he wrote a book about it for Harvard University Press, in which he elucidated on this supposed finding. He wrote another popular book about it. Elaine Pagels, the very well-known writer, Princeton University professor of religion, she wrote the foreword to one of these books. So here's the disturbing thing, Mark. We see this allegation that's staggering, that Jesus may have been gay, he may have had a physical relationship with this young man and so forth. And what do we find? We find the very liberal scholars who were very critical of the Gospels in the New Testament, even though they date right back to the 1st century and are based on eyewitness accounts. They poo-poo those, they question those, they doubt those. But then they find this thing, and because this kind of fits many of their social views, they're very accepting of it. And many people, although there were some who raised doubts about it from the beginning, many people were quite happy to report this amazing finding of this letter of Clement of Alexandria and the secret Gospel of Mark. I think it's a good example, Mark, of how some people blind themselves to the historical evidence for the reliability of the Gospels we find in the New Testament and are willing to be incredulous and naive and gullible and buy into bizarre claims because they fit their worldview, without asking the hard questions and forcing the production of evidence that would have ultimately established this is phony, this is a hoax, this is made up. So it's a fascinating investigative detective story of ancient historical documents, this letter of Clement of Alexandria. And in my book, as I say, I sort of unfold it a bit through Craig Evans, a scholar who is quite knowledgeable about it. And I think people will be fascinated to read how it is that historians have now determined that, Morton Smith was laughing under his breath as he created this picture of this gay Jesus that has absolutely zero historical credibility.
And it really seems to illustrate the principle in your book that we have to work hard to set aside our biases and kind of what we hope Jesus will be like and get to the real evidence and discover who the real Jesus is. Kind of let Jesus speak for himself.
That is so true, because when you have a bias that makes you be more gullible towards certain things, just because of what they say, more susceptible, but not doing the hard work of saying, I'm going to truly investigate the historical underpinnings of this. Mark, I have no fear of anybody doing that for the Gospels we find in the New Testament. When you look at these alternative Gospels, the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary, the secret Gospel of Mark and so forth, the Jesus Papers, these things that have been propagated and discussed in the media in recent years, time after time after time, when they are subjected to the same historical scrutiny, what you find is they just don't hold water.